Hello again, everybody. Today we have a very distinguished guest, my dear friend Elizabeth Hart, and caretaker for a long time, couple of years. Was it? It was a long time. Anyway, we have a lot to go over today on the program. I have a list of things in case I forget. We got everything. We're not going to miss anything today, Liz. So, yes, let's get started. You were a caretaker for me when I had my accident way back in 2007. You were there in the hospital, like you were one of the first people to come to the hospital, and you were there with me pretty much the entire time. And I just want to open it up, get your take on what happened, because I'm going to share my story, and I have my story or whatever, what I remember, but looking at it from the outside, just give your take on what happened, and I don't know, give people a lens to look through.
Well, you know, I think when you think about a caretaker, you think about, you know, kind of brings to mind somebody who signed up for that role as like a, you know, a nurse or something like that. But I think a lot of caretakers just become that because their loved ones get hurt, whether it's a spouse or a parent or, you know, a best friend. And so, yeah, I don't really think of myself as a caretaker, but you just needed a huge amount of support after your accident. It was a big shock. It took a really long time for it to kind of sink in, and you know, it was almost kind of like survival mode, like what do we need to do to help you get better and help you recover in whatever way you're going to recover, because they said you were going to be, you know, totally incapacitated. And so it was just kind of, you know, doing whatever I could to help you heal.
So early on, there were obviously physical things. Before we get into some of the more psychological things, maybe what do you remember as far as the physical things that as a caretaker you had to deal with? And I don't know, do you have any helpful tips or hints or anything you can give to people that are, you know, sort of maybe in those early stages, trying to find their way with somebody who's had a traumatic brain injury?
Well, I think every brain injury is very different, as I have been learning from talking to other people who've been through that. Some things that are pretty common, though, is that first of all, just the kind of shock of what happens. Nothing can really prepare you for somebody's personality changing, and the healing process of the actual injury. But then also, there were a lot of things that were very frustrating and difficult. For example, you didn't recognize that I was who I was. You thought that I was sort of like an imposter, and you wanted your real friend. You kept saying, "Where's the real?"
My mom too. I thought she was an imposter, and my dad was like the only one that I seemed to know who he was or had conversation with. But
yeah, so you felt frustrated that you didn't have your support system there, and so that was equally frustrating for us. And then also, you know, just the looming question of, is my friend ever going to be who he was again? Am I ever going to be able to have a conversation like we used to? Are you going to die? Are you going to heal, you know, only in your body, but your brain's not going to heal? I mean, those are big, overwhelming, scary questions, I think, that come up for any caretaker that's dealing with a brain injury.
What about the physical things? I mean, you don't have to go into detail, but I'm sure there was a burden on you and the nurses having to deal. I mean, just basic functioning.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's challenge. It's got to be challenging. I mean, I was kind of, you know, wearing this body and not doing a great job because I had things that were damaged, but you had to sit there and guide me through a lot of these things. I mean, anyway, take it away.
Well, you didn't realize how hurt you were, and that's another common thing. You didn't realize how hurt you were and how unable you were to do the things that you used to do. The most simple things like getting up out of the bed. And, you know, they would try every way to restrain you in the bed, and you always figured out how to get out of it. But you would just, you know, like open any door and pee, for example. I mean, there were little things you didn't understand that.
It felt natural, I guess.
you didn't understand your limitations, and when we would try to help you, you would get very frustrated because everybody wants to be independent, and you know, it took a really long time for you to kind of figure that out.
Yeah,
I'm not sure you ever did.
There is, you know, my earliest memories, I remember, you know, my emotional disposition toward life, like what I wanted for myself, it didn't change. My ability to do things, my ability to like function and like do day-to-day practical stuff was completely discombobulated. However, my desire to be and do and feel like I used to was still there. That had to be frustrating. That sort of gets into more the psychological, emotional part of it, because there's the physical stuff early on of, you know, you had to help walk me. You know, I don't know if you had to dress me. I don't even remember these things. But obviously, you know, you had to sort of, you know, was I talking a lot? I mean, can you speak about that?
I mean, you couldn't do anything in the beginning. You couldn't do anything, and you were in a lot of pain. I mean, you were in extreme, brutal pain, and so a lot of your time in the first months after the accident was spent trying to manage your pain and your frustration levels with that. And yeah, it was just really overwhelming. You would get very overwhelmed. The thoughts of what had happened to you, because you were still so confused about what had happened and why you were still in pain and why you were still confused. And common with brain injury, you would get extremely overstimulated just by walking outside and seeing the activity on the sidewalk, or something like going to the grocery store was just absolutely overwhelming for you, and you would get angry, you know, and you would get frustrated, and it was scary. We didn't know if it's going to be like that forever, and you know, so that was really hard. But there were also other things about it that were interesting, because you also had sweet moments where you were just very kind, and even despite your situation, you just look around and appreciate. You were kind of in this bubble for the first few months after the accident, where even though you were in so much pain and you were so confused, you had this kind of light around you, where you were so appreciative of your mom and your dad and me, and your aunt and your grandma who were there, and you just really had this kind of, it's like you had a protection around you that was really sweet. So it kind of balanced it out.
Yeah. As a caretaker, dealing with the challenges I was obviously having, but you were having challenges too, because here you are, you know, my best friend, we've known each other a long time, and all of a sudden you're dealing with something that this isn't like, oh, you know, Clay broke his leg and he needs you to you know, help him walk around the house for a month or whatever. Like, this, you didn't really know anything. You didn't, and there, you know, was there any guidance? Did you have any help along, like people mentoring you as to what brain damage was and what to expect?
Not until we came to Portland and you had found alternative healing, and then we had just started to hear some different things. But no, I mean, your doctors at the Atlanta Medical Center, who were wonderful in putting you back together.
Putting me back together.
Restructuring your whole skull, basically. Yeah. But they all were very clear that there's no treatment for brain injury. There's just nothing you can do. And how you are is how you're going to be forever. And there might be a very slow increase for the first, I think, year, and then that's just how you are. Mm-hmm. And they
you just plateau, and
adamant.
That's it.
Yeah, they were adamant. And so, so I believed that to a point, but I didn't believe that you couldn't, you weren't going to get your personality back. I didn't believe that you were, I just had hope. I still had a lot of hope. So,
I guess that just hits on it right there. You had hope. Is that, I mean, to me, in my experience, watching you and being involved in it, and for myself too, that's almost essential to have some hope, right?
Well, I felt like if you could just remember who you were, if you could just get in touch with that, because you were so discombobulated. I mean, you were all over the place. You didn't even know what was going on. You words weren't making sense for a really long time, and I felt like if you could just remember who it was that all your loved ones loved. If you could just
Who is that
get
guy?
in touch with that, then
I'm still trying to find him.
And it's different, and it's changed. You're really different. But I just felt that if you could just remember that, you would be okay. And so, yeah, I mean, your other friends and I would make photo albums to remind you of, you know, things you had done in the past, and we would joke in the same way. And you know, you'll never go back to who you were, but I think I just had hope that you weren't just some lost brain injury person. You know, you're still a human being with feelings and a future. Yeah,
that's such a it's such a dead end when you think about how a lot of doctors, and I only say this, and I say a lot, I'm assuming, but I experienced it firsthand. The doctors I dealt with, they just it was very much a dead end. Like, this is how you are, and get used to it. And there were really no options outside of maybe going to a, you know, I'm sure there's a support group you can go to, or, you know, like maybe, you know, I mean, it was just, there wasn't a lot of hope within the system of medicine that we were working within. And so there was a couple of years, you were there too, where it was sort of just fumbling around, trying to figure out who I was trying to figure out who I was, and you were right there by me the whole time. Psychologically, that's got to be very exhausting.
Yeah, and I think it took me years to even realize, I mean, once you finally, after a few years, when you really got on the healing track and you were able to take care of yourself, that's really when it hit me. You know, once you were actually living alone and driving, and then I had to go through a healing process, the shock of it, the trauma of it. You know, my whole life changed so drastically, ultimately for the better, but I didn't know it at the time, and it was, it took a long time for me to, and I'm still processing that, you know, and I think with any caretaker, it's so important that they remember to take care of themselves and to be able to feel the pain and the trauma and the overwhelm and the hope.
Right.
You know?
Right, I guess that's another thing too, is that I do remember there was a lot, I mean, for me too, and for us when we were talking with people who were outside, you know, maybe friends that were sort of on the periphery, they would say, you know, gosh, you know, it's got to be so hard, and we'd say, oh no, everything's fine, you know, and there was just this sort of like knee-jerk reaction to say, you know, we're strong, we're fine, we're good, you know, and everything, you know, and not really acknowledge, you know, how difficult it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was maybe, you know, there was like some denial. I know for me, it was some denial about like, whoa, I'm not who I was. Things have changed. You know, it's like I just didn't want to believe it because, you know, it's like I liked who I was before, and I liked the abilities I had, and you know, I just wanted to think it was a hangover and it'd go away. You know, just keep you know, fake it till you make it, I guess. So I guess, well, where was I going to go with this?
Yeah, you were asking about trying to make the most of it.
Oh, right.
And I think that this is important to touch on too, because I was just talking to another woman about this, is that when you go through something like that, whether it's an injury or an illness or a death in the family or something, anything like that, I think a lot of times people don't really know how to respond to that. So they will respond by doing nothing or keeping their distance. That was really hard for me too. A lot of people that I was very close to or that we had been close to just didn't really know what to do. So there was a lot of distance there. And I can look back and see like, oh wow, well that was just too much to take in. They didn't know. So I found myself in the future, you know, as we were going through that, saying, yeah, everything's fine, he's going to be fine, it's no big deal, everything happens for a reason, it's for the better, and this whole thing, because I didn't want to distance people or put that burden on other people about how tragic it was and what you'd been through.
Right.
So, and there's a part of that, yeah, it really I wouldn't have changed anything. If we could go back and make that accident not have happened, I don't think I would do that. So there is a part of it, you know, that I do think opened the door to a huge amount of just spiritual growth, you know, for everyone involved. But at the same time, I think it's also really important to acknowledge, like, that sucked. It wasn't okay. I mean, it was
well,
horrible.
there was pain, you know, we don't,
Yeah.
it was a painful thing, and that is real, and, you know, I think it's important to acknowledge it, that it is a painful thing, and there was a lot of hardship to deal with, and that's okay, you know, like, just because, you know, as we were talking about, like, you know, we were growing very spiritually from it. I felt I've come a long way in my understanding of things, but even still, that doesn't mean that, like, that, you know, we don't acknowledge the pain of it. That it hurts, and it's you know, hardship, and it, you know, whatever.
Sad, and it was unfair, and it's.
Oh, there's a lot of stuff to go over. I mean, yeah, I can get into that later, but yeah, it's certainly so. So, as far as who, and I guess from your perspective, I mean, and because I know from my perspective, there was a lot of being, you know, in who I was before, and then, you know, like the accident, and then, you know, grappling with that, trying to recover, and then who I am now. And it is different. There's the same, and it's different. Psychologically, emotionally, as a caretaker, what is that experience, and what can you tell people that maybe have a loved one that is just, you know, in the early stages of this, and what kind of hope can you shed on these situations?
Well, you know, that's a hard one, because everybody has to go through their own experience, and every experience is completely different. But I think it's really important that everything that you hear, you take with a grain of salt, as far as people telling you that you can't heal and that certain things can't heal. We don't know the limits of what our healing process is until we try it, and every person's completely different. And maybe somebody might not heal physically, but they heal spiritually, or vice versa. So I think it's important to hold on to the hope and just keep going through it, and understand you're gonna have a lot of questions that may never be answered, and get comfortable with that. You know, as a caretaker, you got to take care of yourself too. You can't, if you put everybody else first, you're going to crash. And
right.
I definitely crashed. I
right.
definitely emotionally and physically crashed, and it would have been better if I had been more balanced with my own self. And also, I think from the very, very start, what's very important for somebody with brain injury and who's losing sensory, who has lost different types of sensory perceptions, is to look into very subtle ways to wake up the senses. That's where I started noticing the biggest changes in you before we actually found alternative medicine treatments. For example, going outside, being in nature, listening to very gentle sounds, water.
Just being hugged and touched, and just like little human things. I mean, because, you know, my immediate family, they're not very touchy-feely, you know, nurturing people. They're excellent caretakers. That's not really my relationship with them. It never has been. But, like, just when being around you, you would just, you know, do like little things like this. You okay? And give me a pat on the back, and just, you were, you know, you were there. You were a presence. And yeah, and you were exposing me to all these other things, which I'm going to get into here in a minute, that waking up the senses, you know, through nature and other things. Talking about growing spiritually, though, you know, I've asked myself, I don't know, is it required? Is it necessary? Is it a benefit to have some kind of spiritual understanding, or you know, I don't know, like something, some kind of support system inside of you, inside your own belief system, if you will, to navigate this. For not only a caretaker, but also, well, I mean, for me, well, for a caretaker. For a caretaker.
Well, for everybody.
For everybody. Okay.
You know, that's a kind of a tricky question, because I don't know exactly where I was on the spirituality scale before the accident.
You're the ladder.
The ladder. I had always had kind of this faith and I was sort of raised to believe that there was something bigger out there, but I didn't really have any real connection with it. So I don't know where. All I know is that having a really strong faith in the universe and trusting the way the universe is unfolding helped tremendously, and it's hard to put into words, but I think it's essential to have a faith, whatever that means to you, whatever your faith is, to help give you strength and grow and keep hope.
I've always trusted that there is an intelligence behind the process that I'm living, that we're all living. I do believe and feel that. I don't want to say any more than that, because, the more we talk about it, the more it's not it. But whatever. But yeah, having that understanding and feeling it, it's sort of like, I remember being in certain bouts of pain and just sort of like laughing, like, wow, what an incredible experience. There was a part of me that was not taking it personally. Can you maybe speak about that? Because it's so easy when you're in the midst of chaos and turmoil to not take it personally. But an impersonal understanding of maybe the situation can be helpful. I think it helped me. What would you say, looking back as a caretaker, is that maybe taking a step out of the situation, and I don't even know if that's possible. I really don't know. I can't see it.
Well, I mean, I will say that something that I saw in you that I haven't seen as much in some other people who've been through similar things is that you never fell into blame or anger or feeling unjust about what happened to you, even though by all accounts it was so just wrong and unjust. But I think you noticed very early on that those kinds of feelings were toxic, and they made you feel really bad, and they didn't help you at all.
Yeah.
And so
it's a bad feeling. It's just...
Yeah. Just letting that go, and I think that goes back to having faith. Like, okay, something happened, it was big, I don't have the answers, I don't know why, but trying to attach a negative emotion to it is just absolutely toxic.
And I often felt like, for me, and maybe for you too, that people offered their, gosh, it's just so unjust, and what a shame, and this is awful, and that was what was coming up for them, and they would offer that, and it would have been so easy to, oh yeah, it is, oh gosh, but woe was me. But I tell you what, it didn't make me feel any better to try those feelings on. I didn't want to go there. I don't think it's good for your health.
I don't think you can heal if you're harboring those kinds of feelings. So I think that helped you from the very start, just to be like, okay, this happened, what next?
Right. What next? And that's the other side of it is the what next. Okay, this happened, what next? Is I was in the other extreme of like, it's not that bad. It's just, it just feels like a hangover. I'll be good. And then, of course, that created a lot of chaos for the people around me. And so, I hopefully learned a little bit about, being a little bit more considerate. Okay, moving right along, because a really big piece to this is your professional. It's really interesting how professionally you went down a road that corresponds so closely to what you experienced as a caretaker and how it unfolded. Yeah, would you like to talk a little bit about, what you do, what you've done, and like what you're working? I mean, just take it away.
Yeah, I'll try to sum it up a little bit.
Sum it up.
There's so many parts.
Yeah.
But I studied phytoremediation, which is using plants to heal polluted environments, polluted soils and things like that. Plants can actually heal, digest pollutants through their natural metabolic processes. I studied that in college. Your accident was after that. Yeah. And I noticed when we were at your hospital, and you were stuck there for weeks and weeks and weeks, I don't even remember how long, but there was a little
2
garden.
months.
Okay, there was a little garden outside of the hospital. Otherwise, it was a very urban area, loud, noisy. The hospital conditions, like every hospital almost in North America, very sterile environment, harsh noises, lighting, stressful, everything around you was very stressful in every sense.
I kept thinking I was in Vietnam. I mean, the helicopters and
jail
banging and yeah.
Yeah, you didn't know where you were, but you knew it was a really bad place.
Yeah, it didn't feel very good.
So this little garden outside, I would go there every day just to take a deep breath and get out of that scene. And also all the doctors and nurses, when they had their breaks, were out there, and the patients were out there. Because just something about being in that setting around plants was very restorative. And when you were well enough to get you in a wheelchair, I would push you out there every day. And instantly your mood would improve and you were less stressed. When you had less stress, you had less inflammation. So you would use less pain medication, so you have less side effects. And it was just this whole cascading experience. And that really struck me. That really had a deep effect on me, and how healing going out in this space was compared to all the other things you were doing to heal. Mm-hmm. And the simplest thing had the biggest effect. So after you started getting better and better, and we started looking into alternative medicines, we realized walking in nature has a very profound effect on particularly people with sensory problems from brain injury or for whatever reason, because those subtle sounds and colors and scents wake up your senses. So I went into green roofing for my job, something I've always been passionate about, and I started really looking at the connection between people and plants, because we do a lot of hospital work, and I was on hospitals all over North America noticing the very same scenes inside of the hospital, like how just stressful and terrible it was.
Yeah.
But they have all these spaces to do green roofs where patients who can just lay in their beds and look out the window and see a greenery, because there's so many. The way hospitals are built, most of the windows look out over other roofing because they're built in stages.
It's ugly.
It's awful.
And your video, it shows that.
Yeah, you can link. Well, I'm sure we'll have.
We got a link. Yeah, well, we have a link to her video.
We can hear all the details,
yeah.
But basically, I really started learning and studying and researching the connection between people and nature, and this is basically a plant's ability to heal is profound, and they can help people heal. I don't know what it is. Nobody's been able to identify exactly what it is, but when people are connected with nature, particularly plants and greenery, they heal.
Okay, so it sounds like that would be a recommendation for caretakers then, and it seems like, you know, something simple that you can do with your loved one that is experienced traumatic brain injury is to get out in nature. I mean, I know for me that was such a saving grace, is to be out in nature and be on the trails. I mean, I was truly taking in a lot of stimuli for sure, but when it's, you know, birds chirping and wind blowing through the trees, you know, it's very gentle and it's very healing. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so is that something you would say?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that a caretaker and the patient can do together, you know, and to help everybody calm down and relax and get out in nature, even if it's something as simple as just going and sitting in a park and going and sitting in the backyard, you know, someplace where you're not going to be overwhelmed by other noises, where you can actually hear and smell and see the subtle things happening around. Yeah.
Last thing I want to get to is sort of, well, this is the rubbing up against limitations, and how the caretaker at that point of the recovery, if you want to call it that, or the healing, the caretaker can. It's a fine line between, okay, well, you know, I'm looking out for them, and I'm holding them back. Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with that, and maybe some advice you'd like to give any of the caretakers?
Yeah, I mean, that's really hard, because when you really care about somebody and you see them suffering, all you want to do is make it better and protect them, you know, really protect them. And the thing we learned, there's a term called agnosia.
Agnosia.
And that's where somebody who has a brain injury, or maybe any type of trauma, does not register how serious it is and thinks that it's that they can just go right back to what they used to do. So, for example, you were still hooked up to, you know, tubes and machines and needles and everything inside of you, strapped to your bed, and you thought you were just fine. You were begging your dad to pull the car around.
Yeah, we gotta go.
Every 10 or 20 minutes for weeks, you'd be like, okay, Dad, you're pulling the car around,
Yeah,
right? We're
we're
ready
getting
to
out of
go."
here, right? Yeah.
And then when you did heal up and got out of the hospital, you immediately wanted to go back to grad school. And you did, and there was nothing we could do about it as a grown-up. You
Yeah.
went back and you signed up for all these classes, and then of course you quickly realized that
Yeah, it's a little much.
you had to drop out of all of them, I think, except for one, which you barely... So,
yeah.
and also for the example with driving, so it's hard to figure out what you do to protect the person and where those limitations are as a caretaker. What are our limits? So for example, when you were starting to heal enough that you wanted to drive, I really didn't want you to drive. I thought you were, again, overestimating your abilities, not understanding your limitations, and it was terrifying to me to think of you driving, and I think it ended up you did it anyway. And I think it ended up being one of the best things for your sense of independence, and it was fine. And you knew you couldn't drive at night and those kinds of things, or maybe not in too much traffic, but it was years ago and you haven't had an incident to speak of. So well, I think it's hard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's sort of the thing, is like it's important that to heal, to create new pathways in our brain, that we sort of challenge ourselves and do new things in different ways. Obviously, getting in a car and driving, you know, that's until you do it, how do you really know if you're ready to do it, right? And it turned out to be the case that I was ready, and it was great. And thank God I did, because like that independence, fueled my journey of trying new things and reinventing who I was, and it was so important. But I don't think a lot of people that knew me were too thrilled about that. And anyway, I want to say that Liz was such an angel for me in so many ways, because I didn't have the typical support structure. I don't know what's typical, but you were like the one person that was with me and that was seeing me through it, and I felt like I felt like I put a lot on you, and you came through it beautifully, and I don't know, I have nothing but the deepest gratitude. So thank you so much. Is that it? Anything else? Anything else you want to tell caretakers out there?
Well, now I want to interview you.
Okay.
I have some questions.
I think we're going to switch seats. And she's going to interview me now.
We can't switch seats because you can't hear.
That's true. I can't hear out of this ear. So maybe we'll just switch shirts or something like that. Well, we're going to do this.
Okay, ready?
All right. No, cut.